And if you see any red on hers, which you won't ever, you see that she's awake. Yeah, it says 8 hours and 55 minutes, but she lays in bed for about 8 hours and plays with her phone and stuff. So she doesn't sleep 9 hours. So she just wanted me to tell everybody that she doesn't do that. So then look at Theresa's. Now let's look at mine. See who's the most stressful here. This was last Thursday's sleep patterns. Look at this difference in the sleep. She got 8 hours and 55 minutes. I got 3 hours and 33 minutes. I wonder who deals with stress more, Theresa or myself. And then there's the comparison up there that's kind of interesting. So get a Fitbit and find out how little you really sleep. I didn't realize how bad my patterns were, but you'll find a couple of times when I'm up there in the night, and that's after taking melatonin too, by the way, and some other little thing. But that's after taking melatonin, 3 hours and 33 minutes. You know what heaven's going to be to me? Sleep. I'm going to just say, Lord, I know everybody wants to see me, and I want to see you, but can I just sleep for about 1,000 years here? And anyway, there's just a little thought process there. We're going to go through the book of Philippians, and Paul was an amazing guy. Through the book of Philippians, we're going to get some points out of the book of Philippians over the next few weeks and talk about how Paul, with the crazy life that he lived, didn't stress out. And we'll share with you just some thoughts on there. You know, the word press means to pursue, to seek eagerly, to earnestly endeavor to acquire something. So Paul had a vision for his life. He decided that I'm just going to go for this thing. And man, this guy just went all out for Jesus. He was 100% in. And yet, all the things that happened to him, he seemed to do it without stress. It's been said that our bodies aren't equipped to overcome stress. A lot of times when things happen to us, there's a hormone to counteract our situations. But with long-term stress, there's no hormone to counteract long-term stress. Paul figured out how to live without stress, even though he, again, went through some of this amazing stuff. We use this scripture in Philippians chapter 4. He says, not that I speak in regard to need, this is 4:11, for I have learned in whatever state I'm in to be content. The Amplified says it this way, not that I'm implying that I was in my personal want, for I have learned how to be content, satisfied to the point where I am not disturbed or disquieted in whatever state I'm in. Oh man, if I could get to that place. So in this lesson, in these series of lessons, he said in 1 Timothy chapter 6, he said, godliness with contentment is great gain. In the series of lessons that we'll be doing, you're not having somebody that has overcome this area of my life, but a man who struggles with it daily of dealing with stress. When we were in this building project, and millions of dollars, we needed millions of dollars for this buildings project, and John Bishop and I would actually get on the phone and we'd talk for hours about how we wanted to trade buildings and do all this kind of stuff. And 3 years ago we thought we'd just make that happen, and it didn't work. And man, I think I stressed out a lot, and he stressed out a lot. We talked back and forth, and we were both stressed out. And he'd say, "This has happened to me, and this has happened." We were both talking about all the stress. And then after 3 years, it all worked out exactly like we dreamed of it earlier. And it's like, well, why did I spend 3 years stressing out over that? When it seems like, and like the Lord spoke to me in a still small voice, he said this to me, and I'll never forget him speaking that. Sometimes he speaks loud to me, and other times he speaks in a still small voice. I was down here praying, and I believe that's where I was at when he said this. But I believe I was down here praying, and he said to me, I got this. I got this. And so I had to remind myself constantly, as you're picturing yourself this building getting sold out from underneath us, and us meeting in a high school and losing half the people, and bad leadership, and all these thoughts. Anybody relate to some of this stuff? All these thoughts run through your brain, and you go to the doctor and you got a little pain, and you've got advanced stages of cancer before you get there from your little pain that you have. Anybody relate to that? I mean, your mind just goes crazy, and your kid goes out and does something, and next thing you know, you see him under a bridge. And it's like, come on. I mean, I think we spend a lot of our time stressing out on things that really don't matter to us. I really, in the long run, probably will be okay in the long run. I think for me, as I get older, I'm learning that, and for me, I was probably harsh on people and different things because I thought that you see these negative things happening, but for me now, I can look back and I can say, wait a minute. The things that many times the things that we thought were so big, 10 years later, we're laughing at them. You ever think about this? Just 50, 60, 70 years ago, our arch enemy was Germany and Japan. I mean, we hated those people, and they hated us, and they were killing everybody. We're killing them, or I'll kill you, you kill me, we'll kill you back, we'll drop this bomb on you, we'll kill you back. And now we can freely go to those countries without a visa, without even a visa ahead of time, because we have such a good relationship with them. Why didn't we just cut out the last 70 years and just go get right to that part? So many things we just don't really see of the long-term effects of. Stress can cause all kinds of stuff in our lives. Here's some symptoms and causes of stress. Drink as much alcohol as you can to numb pain and avoid life. Use drugs, particularly illegal drugs, to escape from life's problems. Run down your body in every way possible. Eat lots of fast food. Stay up late and sit around and vegetate. Get yourself into huge financial trouble. Use credit cards and spend wildly and impulsively. If you like it, just buy it. Stay away from happy people. They could rub off on you and cause you to cheer up. You have too much to feel bad about and don't need anyone disturbing your unhappy flow. Become a regular complainer, criticizer in everything in sight, or about everything in sight. Make sure you don't let anyone's mistakes pass. Yell, scream, and show no mercy. Ooh, it's just getting quieter as these go on. Be a victim of everything and everyone. Make sure you pass around blame as much as you can. Believe you are never at fault for anything. Number 8, make a decision since you never make a decision since you might make a mistake. Don't decide anything, waver and agonize. Number 9, read into everyone's behavior. They probably don't like you and are trying to compete with you and want you out of the picture. Live in paranoia. And finally, all this good news we're telling you. Whenever there is bad news, assume you'll be the next victim. Think about it, and how about it? Fill your mind with tragedies of the nightly news. Here's a little video that talks a little bit about stress.
In a busy world with unending work and responsibilities piling up, stress can get to the best of us. But how bad is it for you, really? Can stress actually kill you? From a biological perspective, stress makes perfect sense. If you're about to get chomped on by a bear, your stress hormones better kick your butt into gear. But it turns out that your mortgage, unemployment, and looming exam all trigger the same stress response in your body. And unlike most animals, which eventually experience a major decrease in these hormones, humans can't seem to find the off switch. Even though it's not life and death, our psychological woes consistently bathe our bodies in these hormones, making our heart pound, muscles tense, and stomach turn. In Japan, they have the term karoshi, which literally translates to death from overwork. In what is now deemed an overworking epidemic, these individuals who are seemingly healthy and in their prime suddenly die. After being officially recognized and documented in Japan, these sudden heart attacks and strokes were quickly linked to stress. But how does stress cause this? Cortisol is one of the main stress hormones, which helps divert energy to where you need it and away from non-essential functions of the body. But with chronic stress exposure, problems arise. The immune system shuts down, inflammation is inhibited, white blood cells are reduced, and susceptibility to disease increases. Some evidence also suggests that prolonged stress may be involved in the development of cancer. When looking at the arteries of macaque monkeys, those under significant stress have more clogged arteries. This prevents blood from getting to the heart quickly during stress and can ultimately lead to heart attacks. The brain also takes a toll. When looking at mice exposed to stress, we see dramatically smaller brain cells with fewer branch extensions than normal mice. This is particularly prevalent in the areas associated with memory and learning, which may stir up some memories for you of those wonderful all-night study sessions. The acute stress and sleep deprivation can make it increasingly difficult to remember the things we want to. Perhaps the most telling story is in our DNA. We contain something called telomeres at the end of our chromosomes, which decrease in size with our age. Our video on aging here explains this process. Eventually, the telomeres run out, at which point the cell stops duplicating and dies. So telomeres are directly related to aging and length of life. And it turns out, stress may actually accelerate the shortening of these telomeres.
Oops. Is that it? Okay. Here's some stats. Listen to this now. I don't know if you're going to like these or not, but I got to set you up because I'm going to bring you out of this thing. I guarantee you're going to be stress-free and never have a problem the rest of your life when we get done. Well, I tried. And I'm also running for political office. 44% of Americans feel more stress than they did 5 years ago. 1 in 5 Americans experience extreme stress, shaking, heart palpitations, depression. Work stress causes 10% of strokes. And I'm just going to give you a bunch of this. 60% increase in productivity over the past 20 years plus stagnant wages equals working harder for less. Stress is the basic cause of, listen to this, stress is the basic cause of 60% of all human illness and disease. 60%. 3 out of 4 doctor visits are stress-related ailments. Stress increases the risk of heart disease by 40%, the risk of heart attack by 25%, the risk of stroke by 50%. 40% of stress people overheat or eat. It does say overheat or eat unhealthy foods. 40% lose sleep every night. Wonder who's guilty of that. Listen to this one. I didn't know this. Stress shrinks the brain. Extreme stress events, divorce, job loss, etc., reduce gray matter in regions tied to emotions and psychological functions, which can lead to future psychiatric problems, and psychotic problems. Stress-related ailments cost the nation $300 billion every year in medical bills and lost productivity. $100 billion more than obesity cost Americans. Wow, yeah. You want more? I don't think you want any of these, but I'm trying to find you in this thing. Stress can make acne worse. Researchers say stress-related inflammation rather than a rise in sebum, the oil substance in skin, is to blame. Well, it's a myth that stress can turn hair gray. Stress can cause hair loss. In fact, it can cause loss up to 2 or 3 months after a stressful event. The stress hormone cortisol not only causes abdominal fat to accumulate, that's interesting, but it also enlarges individual fat cells, leading to what researchers call disease fat. We're just a mess, aren't we? Stress is linked to the 6 leading causes of death: heart disease, cancer, lung ailments, accidents, liver cirrhosis, and suicide. Chronic stress can impair the development growth in children by lowering their production of growth hormone from the pituitary gland. Gosh, there's so much more. I just don't know. I probably should cut this off and give you some good news. Let's see. Chronic stress floods the brain with powerful hormones that are meant for short-term emergency situations. Chronic exposure can damage, shrink, and kill brain cells. Oh man, I think I'll save the rest for next week. Remember the brain cells one. I just don't have time to go. I just can't get that depressed over things, you know. I just learned I'm just a crazy mess. So here's the Apostle Paul. And this amazing thing is the Apostle Paul is writing the book of Philippians from the Romans had him in jail. Now, the Apostle Paul, in his 3 missionary journeys over the years, imagine only 3 missionary journeys where he visited churches and things like that. And today we just get on an airplane, we do three in 3 years. Here Paul did 3 in his lifetime, 3 missionary journeys. And the Apostle Paul spent between 5 and 6 years in accumulative in the prisons that he went to. A lot of times we think he went to prison and out 2 hours later he was out. Sometimes he was in prison for 2 years at a stint. And the guy was, people say, well, this is the Apostle Paul. Remember, this guy is no different than you and I, flesh and blood just like we were, call of God on his life, but no difference. And he gave us some keys in the book of Philippians on how to deal with stuff. Listen to some of Paul's crazy life. Look at over in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 22. Listen to this. In 2 Corinthians, he's giving you some of his things that happened to him in his life. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. In laborers, and listen to this, in laborers more abundant. In stripes above measure. Stripes means whippings. In prisons more frequently. In deaths often. From the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 5 times he had 39 stripes. That means 39. Can you imagine getting up and having somebody beat you with a whip, or 39 times, as Jesus was, he was whipped 39. 5 times that happened to him. 3 times I was beaten with rods. We'll talk about that in just a second. Once I was stoned. That means regular stones. Because I think I would get stoned if I went through just what he went through. Marijuana would be legal, so just kidding. So 3 times I was in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil and in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness, besides other things, what come upon me daily, my deep concern, one translation says, and the care for all the churches. This guy went through some junk. This guy was in prison, and he was beaten 5 times, stripes on his back, 5 times by the Romans. Beaten with rods 2 or 3 times. Well, how many times did he say? 2 or 3 times he was beaten with rods. You know what beaten with rods is? The Romans were cruel people. They did not, they looked at punishment as a deterrent, and man, it was. When he was beaten with rods, the rods are, imagine about the size of a nice size dowling rod that you use for a clothes closet. And they would hang you upside down with your feet exposed, and they would beat the bottom of your feet, and they would take and they just, imagine your feet are sitting out here like this, and somehow they'd hang you to where they could do it. And they'd take the rods, and they would beat the bottom of your feet as hard. They just do it till your feet just completely broke, and the bones in your feet busted. And 2 or 3 times that happened to him. How many times? What did it say? How many times? 2 or 3 times it happened to him. 3 times. 3 times. So 3 times. Probably 3 times in his life, he probably went through a time where he could not walk for 6 to 8 weeks, probably because of the beaten with rods. This dude was crazy. First time they did that to me, I'd say, "Hey, what's up with that, man?" Us Americans, we'd say, "I'm out of here. This thing doesn't work." Not the Apostle Paul, man. He stood firm. This guy was amazing how he figured out how to press in life without stress in life. Beaten with rods. Whipped many times, stripes upon his back. One time they took him out of a city, or in the city, didn't like what he's preaching, and they pick up stones, and they stoned him and threw him out of the city. It says they threw him out and left him for dead. They thought he was dead. It says the disciples got around. I'm sure they're praying in the Spirit, praying in tongues, praying over him. And he gets back up and goes in the city the next day and preaches. This dude was crazy. And all the stuff he went through and then he had the care of all these churches. He had the weight of the gospel. The reason why you sit here today is because of the Apostle Paul. The reason why you're able to sit here today, became one of the most prolific Bible figures of all time, and one of the reasons why you can sit in this auditorium today is because of the revelation that Paul brought forth. Wow, that's amazing. And all this stuff happened to him. And he rejoices. There's something that he points out that I want to point out to you, and this is our first point as we take you out of the negative and bring you into the positive. You're going to find that the number one thing that Paul did, I shouldn't say the number one thing, but because there's several equal to this. But the book of Philippians is an interesting book. While Paul is in jail, he doesn't even hardly talk about it in there. He doesn't say much about it. He's writing to the Philippian church, and then in Acts chapter 16, he was in Philippi and got thrown in jail. So he's probably under Roman capture right now, and they put him in jail, and he's writing letters, and 15 to 17 times in the book of Philippians, he uses either the word joy or rejoice, depending upon the translation that you're using. The number one thing that Paul understood was he had to learn to rejoice in spite of circumstances. And if you're going to overcome stress in your life, you're going to have to make a choice to rejoice in spite of circumstances. Let's look at what Paul did. Let's look at his classic example here. Let me just read a couple scriptures out of Philippians. Philippians 4:4. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Philippians 4:1. Therefore, my beloved, long for brethren, my joy and crown, so stand fast in the Lord, beloved. Philippians 3:3. For we are a circumcision who worship God in the Spirit. Rejoice in Jesus Christ and have no confidence in the flesh. Philippians 2:17 and 18. Yes, and if I am to be poured out as a drink offering in the sacrifice of service for your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. For the same reason also glad and rejoice with me. Now let's take you over to another scripture, and let's talk about Paul's circumstance, and I kind of gave this to you a little bit. Again, this man was able to press forward in life without stress. If this guy can do it, I can do it, and you can do it. If this guy can do it, it's possible for you to do it. Because I don't think there's any circumstances that you've come up against that are equal to the Apostle Paul. So if he can do it, Faith Center Church can do it. Amen? Look at Acts chapter 16. Here's the story of Paul in the Philippi jail when he's going through there. Now, he didn't write the letter to Philippians at that time, but he was in probably a Roman jail somewhere. So Paul and Silas are on this region. They're in the region of Philippi, and they're doing a little missionary. This is on his second missionary journey. It says, now it happened when he went to prayer that a certain slave girl with the spirit of divination met us, who brought her masters much profit by fortune-telling. The girl followed Paul and us and cried out, saying, these are the servants of the Most High God who proclaim us the way of salvation. And this she did for many days. But Paul, greatly annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, I command you in the name of Jesus Christ, to come out of her. And he came out that very hour. But when her masters saw that all their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to the authorities or magistrates. Now here's this, if you've ever been around fortune tellers, not the ones that are on television, because they all went out of business. You'd think they would have known ahead of time that they were going to go out of business because they're fortune tellers. That's all just a bunch of scams. But in certain, when a demon spirit is allowed to manifest in people, there's genuine fortune tellers that can see stuff into the negative realm of the spirit. They can say something's going to come to pass, not because they can see the future, but because they can see the devil's plans for you. And so here's this spirit girl, and she belongs to these magistrates, or she belongs to these people, and that's why they're making money. And she was the rightful property of these people. And so when Paul went in and interrupted their source of income, they had a right to throw him in prison. So he casts out the devil, and they seized Paul and Silas, dragged them into the marketplace of the authorities. They brought them to the magistrates and said, these men, being Jews, exceedingly trouble our city, and they teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or observe. Then the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. There's that beaten with rods again. When they laid many stripes on them, they threw them into the prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. having received such a charge, put them into the inner prison, fastened their feet in the stocks. But at midnight, I love this. Now here, they've just been beaten with rods. Their feet were fastened. You know what the stocks are, where you sit down basically like this. You sit down, and your feet are in some wood stocks, so you got a hole underneath, hole here. They clamp it down on you, and you can't move. And you don't get to say, excuse me, I need to go to the bathroom. You don't get to say that. What do? They just figure out a way to defecate on themselves, urinate all over themselves. I mean, this dude was not in good shape. He's probably relieved that he got his feet propped up because he'd just been beaten with rods. And here he is in a prison, and he's in the stocks, beaten with rods, and they decided to make a choice at that time. And I don't think it was like this overwhelming, hey, this is no big deal. We'll just shake this off. Silas is probably thinking, who did I hook up with? I'm sure some of my staff thought that a few times. Who did I hook up with around here? But here, the Apostle Paul and Silas, and they made a choice. Now listen. At midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. And apparently they did it so loud that the prisoners were listening to them. Or one translation says the prisoners heard them. Suddenly there was an earthquake, so that the foundation of the prison were shaken. Immediately all the doors were open, and every chains were loose. Now this was a supernatural. This wasn't a regular earthquake. Locks don't fall open during earthquakes. The prisoners were shaken, and immediately all the doors were open, and everyone's chains were loose. The prisoners had fled, drew their sword. Supposing the prisoners had fled, the jailer comes in, drew his sword, is going to kill himself. But Paul called with a loud voice, do yourself no harm, for we are all here. Then he called for a light. That's the first man to ever smoke in the Bible. Called for a light. Ran in, fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. This dude chose, in the midst of the most hellish thing that can happen to a human being, one of the most hellish things that can happen to a human being, the cruelty and the pain and the unjust, totally unjust in prison. He's helping a girl. He's helping a girl out. He cast the devil out of her, and she probably became a Christian after that. And he's doing the job. He's doing everything he's supposed to be doing, and trouble came his way. But they chose to rejoice during that time. If you are going to live a life free from stress, in the midst of divorce, in the midst of financial trouble, in the midst of the hardest times of your life, when there's emotional things running, in the midst of the hardest fights you've ever had to overcome that addiction, in the midst of the hardest thing you've ever had to do to overcome the fact that you may be filing bankruptcy, in the midst of the hardest thing when your child's out doing crazy stuff and you're praying and believing, you have to lift your hands and just start saying, Father, you're a good God. You're a good God. You're a good God. Oh, Father, I thank you and I praise you and I worship. And inside you're going to be saying, get drunk, smoke some dope, go have sex with somebody you're not married to, live free. This isn't worth it. This whole thing's not worth it. I give up. I quit. I quit. This is over with. I quit. These men chose to say, Father, I thank you that you're a good God. Lord, we worship you. And it is well. Somebody said, it is well with my soul. They were probably singing that song. It hadn't been written yet, but they might have been singing it. Can you imagine them just sitting there, and they're in the worst prison of their life, and they're sitting there and they're going, it is well with my soul. I'd be going, who is this nut next door? If you can learn to rejoice in the midst of the worst time of your life, the power of God will come upon you and overtake you. But if you can't, the power of that emotion and stress will get the best of you. You have to rejoice. Lord, I worship you today. I praise you and I honor you, Father. 15 to 17 times in the book of Philippians, Paul said, joy, I rejoice in you. He said, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Here he's in prison, and he's giving people instruction. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. There's something about that rejoicing in the midst of our circumstances that change the very circumstances that we're talking about. And the enemy gets us off thinking that we're all alone. We can't make it. We can't do it. It's never going to happen. That person, that husband will never come back. That child will never come back. That person will never accomplish that. You'll never have that in your life. You'll never be able to do something with your life. You'll never build that. You'll never act that way. You'll never do that. And listen to this. Just the fact that you're being told that probably means it's a lie and it's going to come to pass. So you just lift your hands in the midst of circumstance. You say, Father, I know this is going to be hard, but for the next half hour, when I'm the most emotionally down that I can possibly be, I choose to call you my deliverer. I choose to call you my God that supplies all my needs. I choose, Lord, today to call you the restorer of the breach, the repairer of the breach. I choose to call you the God that can repair relationships. I choose to call you my healer today.